Hello and welcome back to this edition of Daily Actives brought to you by Bootleg Macro. I'm Dustin, the show where we review the most active stocks on Yahoo Finance every single day. Now, one of the things that I find to be the most fascinating is when I come and I look at the most active stocks, when I see A, we see Nvidia a lot, B, we've been seeing DJT a lot, but I am impressed to see that we have Snap, SoFi, and SMCI. Now, since this is the first video of the day, I do want to go look at SMCI. We're going to go back over to the model. If you've watched any of my videos, you've seen this before. What an ugly day for SMCI. Now, if we look at it exactly how we got here, over the past month or so, we have seen this price essentially moon. And you can see here in these few days, you can see that you had a volume spike over 3 days, over the 4th, the 7th, and the 8th. That means that each of these days were progressively higher, and each of those days were above the 10-day moving average of the volume. Now that's remarkable because when you think about that, you went from 41 to 47 back down to 45. Now, when we think about where we are only a short month later, today we ended at 33.07. And if you look at that blue lettering with the white background, that means it's 3 standard deviations below its 23-day moving average. And you saw a volume spike as well. Now, the reason that that's notable is because if you see a gigantic price move in any direction, and it's, excuse me, accompanied by a price spike, which means a ton of volume as well as a big move, you've got some bad news. You went from being only $3.35 above the 23-day moving average to being $13 below. That is ugly. Look at this. This is the chart that represents where the price is relative to the 23-day moving average. That is a disgusting move. That is a life-changing move. That is a, if you're short, you're buying a Lambo kind of move. And if you're long, you are not telling people that you lost all this money because you were down 33% in one day, 27% in 5 days, down 30% in 15 days, down 21% in 1 month. I mean, to be fair, if you've been negative on the 3 month rolling return, as you can see, we have been in SMCI since the middle of June. Why would you think there's anything that's going to be positive here? Nothing is going to be positive. Now, if we look over, we've consistently seen essentially a go long as of recently. That's a fake out. We've seen bullishness since the middle of, it looks like the very beginning of October. You can see on the 4th, we're talking about that volume spike earlier. Those were days that you thought you might be able to trust it. But again, when you're looking at that 3 month and that 6 month rolling return, why would you think you're necessarily going to become positive, as well as you did not see any massive breakout? Now, if we go look at the overall volume, or the rolling sentiment, excuse me, what you can see is that we've had extreme sentiment over the past few days, which if you've seen my previous videos talking about NVIDIA, that's very common. Now, the thing that we see as a problem here is that we've gotten a falling bear, but that's because we're at such a high level. If you see this indicator below here, this trend indicator, it generally will peak out around 60 and it will stop around 40%. Now, the reason why that's important is because this thing was well over 60% for multiple days in a row. We were hovering around 60%. The trend was all the way up at 60%. So I'm not saying that you should have expected it necessarily to have bad earnings, but I will say, or whatever was the catalyst to them, I'm actually not sure. But what I will say is that you can never expect a tree to grow to the sky. You cannot expect trees to grow to the sky. Now, if we look at the overall trading signals here, you can see as of tomorrow, we're going to have 4 of the bearish keys. We only have 2. We've got the falling peak. We've got the coming falling bear. I understand what we were seeing though, because we did see some buy signals here. We saw some small bulls. We saw some 1 month trigger bulls. I would have been tricked into potentially going long here as well, just based on my own indicators. But you have got to respect risk, especially when you're considering something that's going to be as volatile as semiconductors. We're going to go ahead and look at the charts here in general. Let me try to hide this and see if we can move this over. Again, what an ugly move. This thing was up at 100 and this thing is down at 33. This has been a short of a lifetime. If you think about the fact that this was February of this year, we were down at $33. Somebody made a killing shorting SMCI. Now, if we look at the overall trend indicator, this is not as quick moving as the previous one. You can see that this is where the bullishness was now under the 15-day moving average of bullishness. Obviously, we were at 60%. Now we're falling down. What a gigantic spike in volume. This is the largest day in volume that SMCI has seen going back all the way to February of 2024. Most likely, based off of what we're seeing, it's going to be one of the highest in terms of. And what's crazy here is if we look at this is one day at 232 million. The previous week, at the beginning of October, when we were looking at the volume spikes, you saw 357 million. I bet you we beat it this week. Just because there's pretty much no way that you're not going to when you think about it's one day already at 232 million, because tomorrow's going to be a big day, probably 100 plus million traded as well in terms of volume. Now, if you look at the volatility, one of the things that I do not like is that you have the volatility which is peaking here. Obviously, this is based on today. Today changed all of the indicators that we're going to be looking at essentially. But you see the correlation is currently negative, is now rolling up while the volatility is rolling over. That means that we're going to get essentially an orderly, steady collapse inside of SMCI, at least for the foreseeable future, until these indicators can completely reset. You see this correlation starting to rise. You see the volatility is starting to fall down. Those things are not great. Look at the overall chart. Obviously, we've gone below the range. The bottom of the range as of today was $39.70. Obviously, we ended at $33.07. Not great. You're going to see this range completely explode. It's going to look like an alligator opening up its mouth because that volatility, while it is falling over, is going to be actually the range is probably going to get really tight. Probably what you're going to see is something like this, where it started to collapse here in the middle of August, the end of July, and the beginning of August, and it's just essentially more of the same since we've seen since the summer. But tell me what you think in the comments below. Are you long? Are you short? Do you like it? Do you love it? Is this even a good review? And before you go, subscribe to the New High newsletter. We send you 25 stocks to your inbox every single Sunday. Stocks between $5 and $20 that are breaking out. Stocks breaking out to one-year highs. Stocks breaking out to all-time highs. It is a great list to get your trading week started. I'll talk to you soon.